All right, well, welcome again to Geneva's On Being series. Today's series is titled On Being a Woman in Academia, and I have 5 amazing and brilliant women here who have traversed the world of academia, and I am really excited to learn from them. Their bios are on the sheet for you, so you can read those as you get to know them. But as we begin, I would love to ask the introduction question to all of them, which is, why did you say yes to this panel? And Dr. Herwaldt, how about we start with you?
Well, I'm not sure you really want to hear my answer, but I happen to be on the Geneva Lecture Committee and was sort of
nudged.
Yeah.
I wonder by who.
I can't imagine. I forget his name.
Handsome guy though, right?
Very.
Oh, yes, Dr. Alambert.
For me, I have not participated in any events from Geneva, but I receive information from Geneva through the email list that Brad graciously added me to. And this topic is just dear to my heart. I understand well the challenges of being a woman in academia, and if whatever I say can help anybody considering a career path in academia, I'm all for that. So it's a privilege to be able to share my experience.
Thank you. Dr. Snetselaar?
Yes. So I was very excited to be a part of this panel, mostly because I think thinking about the role of home life and academia is incredibly important and can be a bit challenging. And I knew that if Leigh Ann was leading this panel, we would talk about some incredibly interesting things. So thank you, Leigh Ann.
That's great. Dr. Tully?
I was looking forward to having a conversation with a diverse group of women who have all had really varied careers, and I thought I would be, honored to share my experience, both the challenges but also the opportunities and the ways of moving forward. And pushing the Academy forward. I think we have the opportunity to do that through these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Nabhan-Warren?
Yeah, well, for a lot of reasons. So pretty much I would just want to amplify what my colleagues here have said. Like Dr. Alambert, I mean, I think it's near and dear to my heart as well, and wherever I can sort of give advice or what to do, what not to do, avoid what maybe things I did. I mean, I always want to take that opportunity and really hear from a variety of perspectives. Plus, my neighbor is John Landon, and he called me, and I'm like, I can't say no to John Landon, so.
Also nudged.
But it's great to be here, yeah.
Well, and as you know, the conversation will go in a variety of directions, but I do think it is pertinent to start with some of the unique challenges that you have experienced as a woman in academia. So I would love to start there. What are the challenges that you have experienced? And let's dialogue about some of those.
Well, when I started, which was decades ago, women's salaries were significantly lower than those of men. So that was, and it was something that really wasn't talked about, was just sort of assumed. I think.
I would love to just push like a little further on that silence piece. What kind of how did that culture of silence come to exist around something like salaries, in your opinion, or how did you perceive it?
Well, let's put it this way. The person who was chair of medicine at that point, nickname from the residents, was the Pharaoh.
Oh my.
And when I tried to do some negotiation with him, fresh out of, still as a fellow, it was sort of like stepping into the ring with the heavyweight champion of the world. And I didn't really have developed negotiation skills or really the position or standing to negotiate.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think that point brings up several things about structures that are really embedded and come before you, right? You were walking into sounds like a very firm structure that would be very difficult for you to change as an individual, but also you didn't have a skill set, perhaps, that now we think about as being very important. And perhaps if you were, I don't know how you would have been perceived by pushing back, but probably as unladylike in some ways. And so I think that the challenge of rethinking what qualities are important in academia or leadership is something that I think as I've moved through my career, I often thought of as a challenge, like being a woman and how can I stand up for myself and how is that perceived and what might that be and what don't I know and how come this person knows how to do it and but I think as I've moved further, I started to see some of those things as actually potential benefit, and so maybe something we can come back to is sort of what we bring as an outsider and how we can make changes through that, and then how some of the qualities that perhaps women in a general sense have that may allow us to change those structures or open up that silence. So I think there's these structural issues that we all have probably encountered, and of course they manifest in very different ways in different fields and in different backgrounds and all of that, but I think they come through for all of us, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if you might speak specifically, that you mentioned about how they come across differently in different fields, and I'm curious about how they come across in journalism. Yeah, so journalism is interesting. So I'm a professor and director of the School of Journalism, but I have an academic background. So I have my PhD, so I do research in this field. So that's also a difference. I have a field where there's professionals actually practicing journalism doing that, and then researchers. So that's always a challenge too to navigate. I think one of the interesting things, and we get to learn from, is both how the news industry has dealt with or not issues of gender and gender equality, and how academia has. And so that's one of the interesting points in my field, is we see those things. So for example, there's a lot more women journalists and a lot more women in media now, but there's not a lot of women editors or top positions. That still exists, right? So there's still that ceiling. There's still the pay inequity in journalism that's pretty severe amongst the top echelon. So you still see that, and there's a lot of parallels to academia. So there are a lot of, my field is dominated by women. There's a lot of women faculty. Our student body is primarily female, but there's still not as many women directors or deans or whatever it might be. So that sort of growth, there's not as many women full professors. So those issues persist, but I do think they're changing, and because of the field being one that's self-reflective too, it gets talked about more, and so hopefully that is the way to kind of continue to push forward.
Mm-hmm. There was an interview by Nora O'Donnell last night on television. Some of you may have seen it, but she was interviewing the CEO of CVS Pharmacy, who is probably one of the highest paid women in that position in America today. And this woman said that several years ago she had been told she was too short, too blonde, and too sweet to be in a role like that. And her advice to everyone, looking at her, was don't let your future, or excuse me, don't let your past dictate your future. And that whole concept of the way you look, putting you in a box, because that's happened to me before, is something important, and she was not letting that stop her. Well, relates a little bit to what you were saying and what you were saying too. So.
I'd love to pick up on what Linda and Melissa, well, actually all three of our colleagues just mentioned. I don't know if you've all probably seen the Barbie movie, but I was thinking about what to say on the drive over here, and I was thinking America Ferrera's speech, her monologue in there was just pitch perfect. It was how hard it is to be a woman. You can never be thin enough or rich enough. If you're too sweet, people judge you. If you're too assertive, people judge you. And just I think how difficult it is to find that sweet spot, right? And so I think that is very real. And as someone who presents as very she/her, very feminine, I've had a lot of challenges with that, assumptions about my intelligence based on how I dress. And that I tend to dress feminine. So I think that's really real. And I'll have to watch that, what you just mentioned, Linda. One of the things, and kind of looping back to what Melissa was saying, one of the things that's really helped me navigate all these constraints, you know, I got my PhD back in 2001. I think a lot of things have improved now. There are more women in academia, more full professors, even though here it's still a pretty small percentage. For me, it's been important to network outside of the University of Iowa. So one of my best friends is the chair of religious studies at Michigan State. And I run a lot of things by her, and there's a group of us, about 15 of us, we meet every year at the American Academy of Religion. We're all in leadership positions at our various institutions. And Amy at Michigan State is the one who has really coached me on how to ask for a higher salary. You know, so I try not, what I've learned is that I don't, not to do it on my own. There are other people out there, and what Amy says is if you don't ask for a higher pay, not only does it hurt you, but it hurts the rest of us. And so I've really taken that, like, I'm, even though I might feel like I have my limitations, I can only do so much, I'm part of a community. And so I think it's been important for me to lean in to my gals, you know, to my squad, you know, to invoke Taylor Swift here, you know, to my squad. That's been important, so.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
For me, a challenge, and I know it is a challenge for many women, and it's been claimed to be one of the reasons why many women decide not to go for higher positions, was having kids and deciding when to do that, and didn't have any pay leave at all. I had my first child, I was a postdoc. I had 4 weeks of vacation time, and I was working the whole time, not in the lab, but from home. I do basic research. And I had my second child. I was just starting a research faculty position here in Iowa, and also had a little bit more vacation time that I was able to take, but although I was using my vacation time, I was still working from home, and trying to manage that for me was very challenging. And just the feeling that, am I failing as a mom? Am I failing as a scientist? Am I doing enough in both arenas? And that's an internal issue. It may not be, I feel like it's caused due to systemic issues, but I personally struggle with not having enough time at home with my kids, and trying to navigate, like, having them in daycare for the whole day. And you know, that was, even culturally for me, I'm from Brazil, and it's not as normal, it's becoming more normal to have your child in a daycare facility the whole day. So that was also mentally hard for me to overcome that I was leaving the kids behind.
I think about you saying, I'm thinking about the systems that can create the feelings that we have in response to motherhood, to caregiving, which are roles that women often take. And then I was thinking, Melissa, about what you were saying about so many women are entering the fields, but not holding the top positions. And I'm wondering if you are seeing some direct correlation between a slower moving systemic and policy change and a lack of women in higher positions. And if so, how do we move the needle to get women into those roles in academia?
I mean, I can jump in a little. I think we know the data shows, right, there have been some changes, of course, in the demographic makeup of leadership, so I don't want to suggest, I mean, you have several people in leadership here that it's not happening, but we know things even that were done with good intention, like automatic tenure extensions when you have a child or whatever. We actually now know with the data that actually helps men more than it helps women. You know, it helps the dads more than it helps the moms. So even when there are changes put in place, or those things are expected, you gave the example of yourself. I have male colleagues where I actually have said to them, no, you need to take the parental leave. Yeah. Because if you don't take it, then you set a cultural precedent that we shouldn't take it. And then, you know, and so I think that's really true, where you feel like I'm not doing enough, but if we don't take we have such little assistance, right? You didn't mention paid leave because you didn't have any. I didn't have right? We have such little structural assistance that the ones that are there, we do need to take advantage of, but we also need to change the understanding higher up. So it may be, you automatically get this tenure extension, or you automatically get this parental leave. But if then someone sees your dossier and in their head they're still holding it against you, right? They're not supposed to, but people still, you know. So I think policies and structures change very slowly. Minds also change very slowly, and they often don't progress at the same time. So I think the more women in leadership, and the more we talk about the invisible challenges, and the more we bring to bear our values and our our assets, our caregiving assets, our family management assets. Like, we're probably all incredibly good at multitasking. These are skills that are valued in leaders that we need to claim as skills that women actually have to a high degree.
I agree so much. I mean, I've got a great staff in the Office of Vice President of Research, and I joked, not really joking, really. I say I really think the best administrators are parents, and especially moms. I'm just going to say it because we juggle so much. My kids are teenagers now, so almost 15, almost 18, almost 21, but their emotional needs, there's a lot of hormones floating around. I mean, they, so I ran home in between meetings, walked the dogs, gave them a hug, got them a snack, and then I changed and I ran over here, put us a little bit. But I think that, and I think we need to claim being parents more. I think for so long, I know I was literally told by men and women, you shouldn't bring up that you have kids or that you're a mom in meetings because it makes you look unprofessional. And I've really rebelled against that because I think that it makes me more human. And, going back to what Melissa said, that we do have quite a few women in leadership positions here at the university. And I think there's a group of us who are trying to mentor other women. I've been mentored by some really amazing women here, including President Wilson, who says, call me to have coffee. So I feel really blessed to be at an institution. I look around at like a lot of peers at Big Ten institutions and, in the SEC and other divisions, and I don't see that kind of cohort of women. So I think we have something really good here, at least on this side of the river. I'm not so sure on the medical side, so I'd love to hear from you, Dr. Herwaldt. But I do feel like when we get more women in leadership, there are more possibilities. But also, I do want to say, sometimes in my experience, women can also be the hardest on other women. And so we need to push back against that. I mean, I think some of my biggest critics have been women, actually. And so my thing that I've always said, I never want to make another woman feel the way that that's made me feel. And so, but I think we do have something good here, and we need to keep building on that. So.
I think too that often women are very torn in terms of they may be at work thinking, oh, I should be at home, and vice versa. And I personally think that things that work really well is to sort of compartmentalize and be in the moment. When you're at home with your family, you're at home with your family, and they get all of your attention and all of your love. And when you're at work, it's fine to be at work and sort of focus on that. But we're sometimes too worried about where should I be and what should I be doing, when if you, I think, really focus, that sometimes can be incredibly beneficial. And as I've told some of this group already, my children, even today, say they're very happy that I had a job, and they're very happy in terms of the way their lives evolved, given that I was having two roles. So sometimes you just need to ask them and find out how do you really feel about this.
It's funny that you said that, because I asked my 12-year-old last night, do I work too much? Because I was feeling convicted in the same way. And so I wonder, what about holding those two parts of our identity so closely and in some ways equating their value as just highly, highly valuable, how we navigate holding that, there's compartmentalization until you get the phone call from daycare, right? But to hold that, I think, my question would be, how do we hold that with power?
That's a good question. I think you hold that with power when you live authentically and according to your values. I think that's how I was able to make peace with my reality. Do we all work a lot? Probably the answer is yes. In some seasons more than others. I think for me it was making peace with the fact that what is my top priority right now in this moment, at this season of my child's age and whatever they're going through, sticking to that and really being at peace with the fact that whatever decision I'm making right now may affect my career, may delay some things in my career, and being okay with that.
I think too, it's really important to look at what you're doing in the workplace and figuring out, should I be doing all these things? You know, what can I give to my assistant? And I will say thank you constantly, and I'll send her emails that say thank you, but there are certain things I am not going to do, because I'm not going to stay until 6 at night when I want to be with my family doing something that I feel isn't probably using my expertise. And so I think that's really important. But that can happen at home too, where, you know, you're saying, I need help here. And I've even said that to my children, you know, please help me with this, do the laundry, do this. And then thank yous at home. We sometimes forget to say thank you at home. You know, that's something we do with other people, but not necessarily our families. But I think that's so important in our families to use just those 2 words for even little things can really make a huge difference.
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned too about kind of being there in the time, but also you were joking about daycare, things happen. You know, I always try to, because we can be our worst critics and hardest on ourselves, right? I always think if someone, my colleague said, oh my gosh, my kid just got sick and I have to go, I would, of course, wouldn't even think twice, wouldn't even care, forget about it, good luck, I'll see you tomorrow. But when it happens to me, you know, so thinking about being kinder to ourselves and treating ourselves the way we actually do treat other people, and remembering most things can wait till tomorrow, both at work and with family, right? If I miss this one thing, most likely it's not, you know, unless it's a grant deadline or something. Most likely it's fine. Right. You know, and so really understanding the stakes, but also I like the word season that you use, understanding sometimes you know, I'm going to be more busy, I'm going to be working these days, and it just is the way it is, and you know, and it's over, we can have time as a family, or I have to be with my family now, and when that's over I can get back to work. So realizing that there is a flow, and that you can't be everything to everyone all the time, or then you're nothing. You know, and so figuring that out and being okay with it and having those conversations, I think is really, really important. And talking to your kids, I talked to my daughter when I decided, you know, if I want to do the role I'm in now, and I said, it's going to mean I'm going to work more. You know, what does that mean? And do you understand what that means? And you know, and sometimes she does, and sometimes she doesn't, and that's fine. and it's just part of life and conversation, and having those open dialogues.
I have a distinct memory. So I taught at a small liberal arts college, Augustana College, in Illinois for 10 years before I came here. And my kids that's where they were born, they grew up. And I remember pushing my 2 youngest in the double stroller to daycare. It was about a mile from the house. And I must have looked haggard. I felt haggard. And the then president, Stephen Balls' wife, Jane Balls, who's a lovely woman, she must have picked up on that. She goes, this is the season you're in now. She literally used that language of season, and it really helped me. I felt like that was such a blessing. She helped me so much in that moment, because I remember thinking, I don't know how I'm going to do this, and but her saying that really helped me. And I think that thinking about things seasonally has been helpful for me in the arc of my career. I had been asked to become a dean at Augustana, and it just wasn't the right time. I think my youngest was still nursing, and I'm like, this, you know, Steve Balls, I said, this really isn't the right time, maybe down the road. And I think for me, it's just like, what is possible and what's not possible, and not beating myself up. And it was the absolute right decision. When I did ease into the leadership position that I have now, having those conversations with my kids, with my spouse, who makes a lot of things possible for me. He does most of the cooking. He has moved to follow me in my position twice. He's been so, I honestly think, you know, this couldn't have happened without his support and help. And my kids are, like you said, Linda, they're really proud that I work, my daughter especially, you know, and but I wrestled with that when they were younger, you know, am I doing the right thing? The daycare thing I used to beat myself up for, and I think trying to be in the moment, trying to find joy in the moment, and know that this is a season, that's been really helpful for me, existentially, spiritually, and philosophically, you know. Yeah.
I don't want to miss, I want to move into a better future, but I also don't want to miss a moment to talk about the diversity of women in academia. And I know, Renata, you can't speak specifically for all international higher ed, people in higher ed, but I'm wondering, and what you can speak to your personal experiences, or others can speak to experiences that they've had relationally, about the unique challenges that international educators face and the unique assets that international educators bring to the table.
I would say I went to school in Brazil, so I did my PhD there and did a one-year program that when I came to the US for the first time, and then returned for a postdoc, but I had to go back to finish my PhD. So all my training was in Portuguese. So language, for sure, is a major barrier. I did not grow up speaking English. I had some school English and didn't really got into studying the language until I was already in college, so as a young adult. So language, for sure, it was a barrier. Culture, there are different expectations here, even in the workplace. Different laws. We have maternity leave in Brazil, for example, 6 months, because they promote breastfeeding and whatnot. So definitely cultural differences and expectations in the workplace and outside the workplace as well. So learning to navigate that on a personal level while also trying to advance your own career can be challenging. I think those are probably the primary challenges I have faced. But those challenges have also made me way more, I believe, empathetic towards trainees from different nationalities. Not only from Brazil, but just understanding that people coming from different cultures have different realities. Different cultural expectations for themselves and others, not taking things personally when things are said that may sound rude to me, but they are normal in a different culture. Just being more accepting of differences, understanding of different cultural backgrounds, and being more empathetic, I would say, towards people from different cultures, and more understanding.
Thank you for sharing that. So we've talked a lot about how to exist in this system, right? Now I want to imagine a new one. So what does an academic space look like that honors the full dignity and humanity of women, and how do we move towards it?
I feel like I'm talking too much, but this is also very gendered too, right? But I think caregiving, I don't remember who mentioned caregiving, but I think establishing a culture of care is so important. And I think that in the office I'm in, I've had to learn a whole new lexicon. Humanists, we tend not to speak in acronyms, you know, and so I've had to learn all kinds of scientific, acronyms, shorthand for things. And ROI is a big one, return on investment. And return on investment in the university system tends to be in dollar signs, right? And for me, one of the things I'm trying to move the needle on in my space, my small piece of the pie, the world here at the university, is what if we thought about return on investment differently? Not just getting the big grants, but actually return on investment. What if we, cared for our colleagues more and didn't think so much about research and dollars, but if we came at it from a different perspective? There's some initiatives that I'm working on now, and I could share one with you that I'm borrowing from Northwestern. It's the associate provost there. We had a conversation. For example, putting on day-long writing retreats for women where we could give a stipend, where they could hire a care provider for the day, having food and coffee for the day, a quiet place to write, to read, to meditate, and then we'll send them home with a meal for their families. Things like that, I feel like that's where we can be investing, and while we might not see a return on investment in the way that we normally think about it in that metric, I think the investment's there in humans, right? And so I in my role, what I would like to change is really start using the role of caregiving and investment in a very different way. Change the linguistic and the lexicon of economics in that way.
Oh, I would love to hear more about that, and even like defining what those human return on investments are, right? I think of the culture shifts that we have talked about. It could be a return on investment like that. So what do others, I want to give others a chance to comment on that. What would a academic space that honors the full dignity and humanity of women look like, and how do we move towards it?
Well, I think too, and I see this in everyone sitting here, I think that it's so important for young women to actually see people in leadership positions. And one of the things that's incredibly important, I think too, is that as leaders, or any of the positions we've been in that involve leadership, we need to be sure that we are affirming those women who are looking at us as role models, and making sure that we care about them sitting alongside us or moving up the ladder ahead of us. And that kind of affirming spirit, I think, is incredibly important. I think Caitlin Clark is an example. She always talks about her fellow players, and having someone that young really care about that sort of situation, I think, is incredibly important.
I love that example that you just gave, because it's so tangible, but also in some ways it's like, wait, it took us to 2024 to really think, what? You know, a meal and a child care provider could really be a difference maker for somebody. So I think things like that, like not being afraid to try initiatives, but I think not emulating the types of people that held us back, but emulating the types of people that we want to be, and being really intentional about that is important. And so to kind of pick up on some of the actual tangible work we can do, valuing both with money, but also with recognition and other things that we have, achievements that don't fit the traditional teaching, research, whatever. And so, like, if you're going to ask somebody to mentor somebody, well, one, does a person know how to be a mentor? Just because you're older than someone doesn't mean you know how to mentor them, especially if you weren't mentored. So, okay, provide them the training to do it. Provide them a sandwich, you know, give them $200, and then recognize them when they're going up for promotion, right? So we have to change the standards to say, oh, all that work that was the invisible labor or the emotional labor, or the, oh, I just did it because, you know, somebody asked me and they were a friend. We have to actually value that, both in the culture, but also really in the tangible ways of money and moving those people up. Because if you start to see people who exude that care moving into leadership, then you can say, oh, I can emulate that, and I want to emulate that. And so I think that's important. I think talking about your backgrounds and your personal, don't just pretend like you just appeared and now you're a doctor, right? None of us were born a doctor, right? what we went through, how we learned, how we struggled, what did we bring that might have been seen as a detriment, a language barrier, but that actually turns out to be a huge asset. Right. I think that's incredibly important. And so to kind of be ourselves at all moments, and then to continue to, because sometimes there's times when you fall back, but to really keep pushing for that change to the system, to make it in the model that you want it to be.
Yes. And I think too, pushing for groups on campus to do the kinds of things you're talking about, that would really move things forward. Yeah, that's exactly what we need.
That is so beautiful, and I think it transitions really nicely into thinking about the students. You know, as students today are in some ways living in what I'm defining as the already, right? A lot of barriers that women have formerly faced have been removed. A lot of things that women have heard said to them, even in this room, I know, Linda, you have, are now not as culturally appropriate to say, though we know it still happens. So a lot of these barriers have been removed. So they're living in the already, but they're also in the not yet, right? So there's a long way to go. And barriers today can sometimes be even more subversive and therefore harder to overcome. So with that in mind, what is your advice for women who desire to or are in the process of pursuing higher ed?
And I think the things that I would recommend is, number one, find at least one really good mentor, but you may need more than one, depending, you know, who gives you help in different ways. who does the kinds of things that are being discussed down here in terms of helps you network, helps other people see, you know, your good work, doesn't take all the credit for the work, but gives you opportunities to present the work that you've done, and you know, recognize that. I also think really becoming skilled in terms of writing and speaking, learning to, you know, things like writing abstracts, presenting talks at meetings, and really becoming good at that and not sloppy, so that, you know, when people see your work, that they recognize how careful you are, and you know, the work that you put in, I think is very important. A lot of what I see in terms of writing and speaking just, you know, just hasn't been refined. And you know, so I work a lot with that with my mentees.
Yeah, thank you. Other advice for our up and coming world of academia?
Well, I think you mentioned something about the sort of the now and the past and the future, and it's not a straight line.
Yeah.
And I think that's also important too. It's not as if, you know, the arc of progress is certainly not straight. And so I think that it's important for particularly younger women who are thinking about going into this field or any, to realize that even what they're stepping into is different than what any of us stepped into, and that causes or fights or human rights that you thought existed maybe actually don't. And so sometimes there are bigger issues beyond your, you know, your job, but thinking about how you can continue to live your values, advocate for the things you believe in, while still doing good work, while still, you know, pushing for people to advance in their careers. So I think it's really challenging for younger folks today, because the world they're in it's not great in so many ways. And so how can they continue to push forward and make impacts in medicine and science and the humanities and the social sciences, and feel that work is important. And so anything that we can do to help create that system, help change that structure. It's little, right? It's a tiny little hammer on a giant, you know, on a giant pyramid with the pharaoh in it. You know, we're just knocking away little by little. And so I think it's important to recognize that, but to bring them along and to listen and take their right, because they're coming from a totally different perspective. So the more open we can be, the more inclusive we can be, the more we look for people who are different than us to bring those new ideas. I think that's going to be the only way that the academy is going to be able to even move, potentially keep up at all with the world that we have. Because if you look at the data, right, why aren't young people wanting to go to college? There's a reason.
Right.
And so I think that's incumbent on all of us to think about, what role do we play, what role do our units play in changing that narrative, and not just saying, oh, young people today kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think that loops back, I think, to having to acknowledge the whole person, right? Yeah. Mind, body, spirit, right? And I mean, you know, one of the things I do with my grad students is we have weekly check-ins, and I've told all of them to be in therapy. I said, therapy is a good thing. You know, therapy is a good thing, or there's some kind of other person you can talk to outside of your academic world. Exercise, eating healthy, I take them out for healthy. I mean, I think just normalizing that too. I think self-care in popular culture has become really sort of a cliche, you know, so I avoid the term self-care because it kind of means something like, I don't know, we kind of chuckle at it now, but it's like, I love our strategic plan with the university because there's the 5 components. I've had to study it a lot for my position, and one of the 5, you know, points is wellness, you know, and I think that that's something we need to normalize too, that yes, you're here to advance intellectually, but also you're not just a moving brain, you're a body and you have a spirit. And so quite a few of my students have their religious communities, their spiritual communities, and I really encourage that. And I think that that's what we need to do as mentors. Yeah, normalize that, and yeah.
One of the things I do in one of the classes I teach is to invite one of the classes to my home. And when they come to my home, I try to talk about, even though the example of the meal is something related to the class, I try to talk about what is life like apart from academia. And, you know, I'm a normal person with, you know, normal feelings and normal ideas, and I tell them stories about things that have happened to me relative to leadership positions often. and I think that kind of thing where you become this person who's very relatable often results in people coming to you to want mentoring too.
I can think of a few words that I believe, at least for me, were crucial in this path, especially as an international trainee. Be persistent, be flexible, be patient, and don't compare your trajectory to other people's trajectory.
Can I add, be human?
Be human, yes, and authentic.
Oh, wow. Can we give them a hand?
Nice. That's great.
We are going to take questions, and I know you're right here, and I know they'll hear your question, but I may repeat it just for the sake of the recording. So just so you know, it's not a tool of patronizing, it's just making sure it gets on the recording if I do repeat your question. So what questions do you have for this brilliant panel?
I'm just going to first say I'm an idiot. Okay, so I'm just going to preface with that. But I think one of the just amazing things, at least for me, and I wish this place was packed out, because that was a phenomenal just articulation of the uniqueness and the, if I can use the term, beauty of what it means to be a woman in academia. And not to get too religious on everybody, but obviously we're a ministry, but I mean, it just reminded me of Psalm 139, that what it means to be a woman is to be beautifully and wonderfully made, right? In any context, but just too, for you all to be able to articulate just what it means is also then celebrate what it means, rather than trying to trying to assimilate, if that makes sense. And so I just am not really, it's not a question. I get annoyed when people do Q&A and then make a comment, and I'm doing the same. You won't be able to repeat any of this.
And I won't just say, Brett's an idiot.
It's on the mic.
Yeah, it was amazing. I think I feel really convicted. I mean, not to sound too crass, but just the celebration of womanhood is better than the Barbie movie.
Well, actually, I'll get a little religious on you in terms of quoting a scripture, but I've been spending a lot of time in Genesis, and you know, I think the problems we've been talking about relate from the fall. And the first thing that happened was relationships between men and women and within the family. And that in Genesis 1 we see men and women ruling together. And that was really the image of what we were created for. And I think the kinds of things we're talking about in terms of helping women, but it really applied to all of us in terms of how we relate to each other, and that we're in it together. and you know, if we behave the way you've been talking about in terms of loving people and respecting them and being real with them, you know, we begin to emulate some, I think, of that, the image of what we should be reflecting, what we should be.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good picture. Mark, what did you say?
I was going to ask Dr. Herwaldt.
It's not fair.
How he balances work and family life.
Well, I don't have children. At one point we had 4 dogs. We have 2 now. But I have a husband who's been very supportive of my work, and has encouraged me to not totally focus on work, but has helped me, I think, find a balance that I might not have had, and also the security that I think is very important. I think he's helped me learn much more about the concept of grace. So I think that, you know, that's been very important in terms of our relationship, and I think gave me the courage to do some pretty crazy things in terms of very few physicians take sabbaticals. I took essentially a year sabbatical. You know, my work is infectious disease and healthcare epidemiology. My sabbatical was on patients' stories of illness. And, you know, to do some things like that seem pretty risky or not the path to success in academic medicine. So he's really freed me up to do those kinds of things. I have more balls on the floor than I have in the air. I am not a very good juggler. And he doesn't pick up the balls that I juggle.
Oh, it's such a beautiful bit of listening. I was reading a little about your book. To take a year to listen, and we're talking about that too, you know, to really listen to people. Does, I think, what you're saying, Kristy, like change, that's real output or return.
I mean, for me, it was like going to patient language immersion school and sort of moving from the way as physicians we are taught to write very reductive histories that sort of fit like the textbooks, and you know, really pay attention to patient stories.
Mention what your mom said.
Oh, in terms of when I told her initially I wanted to go, I was going to,
Person.
Oh, well, my mom first, when I told her when I was 13 that I wanted to become a doctor, was girls don't do that. Subsequently, when I did well in science, it started to be, well, girls who want to go to medical school can't get involved with a guy when she's, you know, and then it kept advancing every year. And then when her second daughter went to medical school and mothers started complaining that their sons weren't getting in there, she was going, well, why are the girls graduating at the tops of their classes? So that was sort of when I grew up. But what he's saying is that I came home, when I was a senior in high school, I got to watch my first operation, and I came home and I was really excited. And my mom, who'd had a kidney taken out when I was young, just looked at me and said, Lori, there's a person under there. There's a person under there.
So that's a metaphor for everything we're talking about.
Yes.
Question about multitasking and multitasking and boundary setting. So, how do you learn to exercise restraint? Just because I could doesn't mean I should necessarily. So, what if I'm how do you learn to exercise restraint so that you can preserve wellness?
Just to repeat that, how do you learn to exercise restraint so that you can preserve wellness?
I do have one comment. I don't think you can multitask. I don't think you can really do two things at once. I think you can do some things sequentially. At least I can't do multitask.
That's why all the balls are on the floor.
That's why the balls are on the floor. I don't juggle.
I think to pick up on your question, that's something that also changes, right? At one point, your boundary might have to be firm, a wall. And sometimes it can be porous, and sometimes it could move to the left or to the right. And so I think one thing we have to think about and learn, and sometimes we mess it up, and that's okay, because it's made up anyway, right? And so to learn, like, what boundary do I need at what time? Right, to kind of go back to like those seasons, like when do I need to be really, you know, cloistered away and have my boundaries? Well, maybe I need to do that when I have personal work that needs to get done, and I have to value that as much as I value my mentor relationships. And maybe there's other times when I'm more flexible and I can say, yeah, my door is open. And so I think knowing that your boundary is not a thing that exists, but a thing you manifest and can change, and just because you told someone this is your boundary, it doesn't mean you can change it. And so I think we have to be flexible for ourselves to understand, like, there are times when you need really to be firm, and there are times when you can be a little bit looser, and then there are times where you think you set a boundary and it's completely violated, and you can go back and say, hey, this isn't okay. To me, it's just not static. And one of the term, you don't like the term multitasking. I don't like the idea of this like work-life balance, meaning that everything's going to be like this, right? I think of it more as a circle, that sometimes it's more full on one side, it's more like, how full is it? And if it's too full and it's bursting at the seams, then you have a problem. But sometimes it can be a little bit more, a little bit less. And I think that's true with boundaries. Because if we get to a point where you can also fixate on that, and then you're just like, one more thing to fixate on, So I like to think about what works for you and what works for your situation or your season. And so to me, I try to think like that, and I try to think in smaller chunks too. Like, what's my life situation in the next 2 months? How much space do I have then? What's it going to look like after that? And so if you can give yourself the time to kind of think through it, and that's also a boundary too, like giving yourself some time to like really reflect on what you can give, what you can't give, who you can give it to, who deserves it. To me, I find that a little bit more freeing than just setting boundaries or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think boundaries for me, honestly, being from Brazil, it's not a thing. So it is an emerging skill, and one that I need help with. But one thing that I have learned about myself is just to really be more self-aware and recognizing when one is really needed. And it's usually when I'm not a good person. I'm not okay with how I'm behaving or how I am relating to people that I care about, and I know that there is some imbalance there, and maybe I just need to ask for help, or I have to delegate something. And I like how you said that it's fluid too. It changes depending on the seasons and whatever you're facing at that specific moment. For me, sometimes when I know I have a very busy season and I do have trainees, I like to prepare them in advance and say, hey, it's busy. I need to write in the mornings, so please don't come to the office unless the lab is on fire. But I'm telling them, I think that is also kind, so I'm informing them in advance and setting expectations for them and for myself.
Yeah. And I think one of the very important things, which I believe you said, was don't be upset if things aren't always perfect. I mean, to think that everything has to be perfect and it has to be this way, always has to be perfect. I think that sometimes is what gets us into a major bind. So being flexible and sort of fluid, and being very kind to ourselves to say, this didn't go quite the way I wanted it to, but that's okay, not a problem.
Everything you all have said, just really, I'm feeling all the feels right now. And I'm just thinking about just an example of something that I think fits what y'all are sharing here. Is I used to think I had to respond to emails right away, or I'd have to say yes right away. I was raised to be a very nice Midwestern. I was raised Lutheran, very good Midwestern Lutheran girl. I've always been a rule follower, like a good girl, typical white Midwestern woman, Christian woman, and it took a while for me to learn to say, thank you for your email, I will get back to you shortly, or saying no without saying no, saying, I regret that I am unable to do this, but I know someone who I think is really well qualified, someone I know who might need some more service, for example, in a department, oftentimes men, but not always, and so I've just learned how to be, because for me the challenge has always been, if I'm too firm, then someone's not going to think I'm nice. I really had to shed that. I really had to shed that to not be preoccupied with that. And the boundaries, I think the fluidity of boundaries. I mean, I love that you tell your students, these are my writing times. For example, tomorrow I'm going on a 3.5 day writing retreat. I go twice a year to a monastery in Illinois. I'm on a silent retreat. I hike, I write, and it's something I do for my own writing practice, spiritual practice, and just, you know, it usually corresponds when I'm starting to feel like maybe I'm not at my best, you know, and mommy needs a minute. I don't know if you read Lessons in Chemistry or saw the show. Children set the table, your mother needs a minute, mother needs a minute, you know. And so I think personal boundaries and knowing when I need to refill my cup, because some days it's not a good feeling when I come home and I'm so exhausted and I feel like my cup is just empty, and then there's more to give to my wonderful children and my pets. I have 2 dogs and a cat too. We just added a cat recently. I don't even know, it's kind of crazy, Animal House. But I'm kind of starting to feel that way, and it just so happens that the retreat comes tomorrow. So it's a really good time. So I encourage you all, a silent retreat is always, for me, it's been really rejuvenating.
We are just about time, or we are at time, and I'll just end with, you know, this kind of collaboration, this kind of collective conversation, not just in isolation, you know, us as women, but for the world to hear, is so beautiful. I was watching the Big Tech Championship, and at the end, I cried because I saw the women coming around these young, the coaches and the young girls coming around these women, celebrating their power, their strength, and then that being celebrated on this national level, so that as an outward facing gender, we can say, like, we hold beauty and power, and may we, going forward, you know, to use the proverb, lift as we climb, right? May we lift as we climb, and may we continue to speak collectively, both internally as we need to, and then outward, because the world needs to hear your voices. Thank you so much. It has been an immense honor.
Thank you.